Welcome to the 5th episode of the Harvard Extension School Psychology Student Club. My name is Kimia Grigoriev, and I'm your host. We are thrilled to have Dr. Vladimir Ivkovic with us today, along with Maya Bach, who has made this episode possible thanks to reaching out to Dr. Ivkovic. We're so honored to have you here today, Dr. Ivkovic, and thank you for being here to speak to our audience.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vlad Ivkovic. I'm a translational neuroscientist at Mass General Hospital here in Boston. I'm a director of a lab for neuroimaging and integrative physiology in Neural Systems Group here at Mass General. The work that we do here primarily focuses on, one, development of brain imaging and physiologic monitoring technologies that can be used in extreme environments. So if you think about it, the question of how can we image a human brain or whatever goes on in our body outside of a clinical world or a laboratory world, right, where things actually happen. And so this is what we are aiming to do. This is the research we have been doing for the past 20 plus years in bringing these technologies to understand human adaptation to extreme environments. So the work that we do primarily involves development of such technologies that are portable brain imagers, effectively, and using them in extreme environments that involve spaceflight. So we do a lot of investigation on astronauts as they fly to space, as they come back to Earth, and hopefully in future missions to Moon and Mars. But also we deploy these technologies to better understand and help populations of both elite performers on Earth as well as patients. So that's why we investigate first responders, firefighters, how they deal with stress and how we can monitor their brain activity and physiologic monitoring and monitor their physiology during firefighting activities, for example, or other first responders, and then understand how these various exposures to stress contribute to their occupational health hazards with the goal of reducing them. Reducing the amount of occupational health hazards that involve psychiatric disorders like post-traumatic stress disorder, cardiovascular diseases, cancers, and so on. And so ultimately bringing this technology and also the knowledge we gain from spaceflight and extreme environments into the occupational realm and further into the clinical realm where we want to help our patients get better sooner or even better, prevent diseases from happening in the first place. So along the line of that research, I also do work with the Veterans Administration here in Boston, where we investigate therapies for post-traumatic stress disorder in our veterans and finding ways to improve those therapies by using these novel technologies that allow us to monitor continuously brain activity and physiological activity as we expose these individuals who are going through therapy through various steps of their therapeutic pathway. And in doing so, understanding better how people respond to therapies and then improving these therapies in the long run. So that's in a nutshell, that's kind of what we do.
So I know you teach 2 classes in the fall semester. One is brain and behavior in the extremes, which has been wonderful. Could you please describe the classes you're teaching at Harvard and when you'll be teaching them as well?
Yeah, of course. I am teaching 2 classes this semester. One class is psychophysiology of stress that is taught at Harvard Extension School, and another one also taught at Harvard Extension School, as you mentioned, is the brain and behavior in the extremes. The third class that I co-teach with Dr. Gary Strangman, who is the head of the Neural Systems Group here, is called Translational Neuroscience, and we teach that course in the spring semester at Harvard College. So for the coming year, for the rest of this academic year, the next time brain and behavior in extremes and potentially psychophysiology of stress will be offered will be in the summer semester.
Could you quickly describe brain and behavior in extremes, psychophysiology of stress, and the major differences in what you choose to include in these 2 classes?
Sure. So brain and behavior in extremes, as the name implies, really looks into the physiological behavioral changes that we see when we expose to people to extreme environments and how we can adapt to these environments, right? So we investigate populations such as astronauts who go through a whole gamut of physiological and psychological stressors during their training, during their exposure to space flight and then return to Earth or another planetary body. We also include work with, as I noted, with firefighters, first responders, with military personnel, but also explorers, right? We tend to forget that a lot of people expose themselves to extreme environments as part of their exploration. So we have Antarctic explorers, we have Arctic explorers, we have submariners, we have people who engage in high altitude jumps from very high altitudes, right, using parachutes, and so also people who are, because of the type of work that they do, they are facing extreme environments such as isolation and confinement, at least for periods of time. We can think about military personnel. We can think about people who work on oil rigs, for example, or facilities like that all experience various levels of psychological and physical stress based on their exposure to these extreme environments. And in terms of psychophysiology of stress, we focus more deeply on the physiological aspects of stress responses and how those relate to our observable behaviors, as well as psychological characteristics that are associated with physiology and that interaction between psychophysiology of our stress responses. So those would be the major differences. We focus really on more baseline data and relationships, mechanistic relationships that allow for stress responses to be generated.
You were mentioning improving symptoms or preventing the PTSD in general. Have you found that anything is particularly helpful with post-traumatic growth?
So that's a great question. So we know that a lot of the development of PTSD, when we look into the general population, PTSD develops in about 6 to 8% of the population. And we know that about 80% of our population in general experiences traumatic events. So it's always interesting to understand what is it that pushes about 6 to 8% of people to that point where they develop the disorder, rather than somehow be able to go beyond the trauma. And therein lay many questions that we are trying to understand, including the post-traumatic growth. And in doing so, we are understanding more and more the mechanisms that contribute to development of the disorder, but also that allows us to better understand ways of improving or building resilience as we go along the way, and also improving therapeutic methods. So we are right now, I don't have a good answer for that, because right now we are going through research projects that looked into the biology of stress response as we continuously expose individuals to various types of stressors as part of their therapy, and understanding which parts of that contribute to amelioration of symptoms and which contribute to actually potentially worsening of the symptoms, or potentially dropout of these individuals from the therapeutic sessions. And so at this point, we can certainly say that exercises that include breathing, so diaphragmatic breathing, meditation, Tai Chi, right? So holistically approaching the body in terms of reducing the levels of sympathetic response or general stress, those things certainly help, with the caveat that the most important thing that we can do to maintain general health, but particularly mental health, and particularly in cases when we have traumatic exposures, is one, protecting our sleep, and so protecting sleep time, duration, and quality, exercise, and nutrition or diet, right? So we know that these are probably things we have been hearing all of our lives. What are the important things for maintaining health? More and more as we do more of this research that delves into specific, very complex interactions of these of various psychological, physiological factors, we are learning more and more that it really comes down to these very basic postulates of behavior and ultimately behavioral change that improve our chances of A, maintaining health, and B, recovering after traumatic events. So certainly I would say sleep well, exercise, and eat well. Like that's my take home.
I know sometimes for people who suffer from PTSD, they often experience a lack of meaning in life, and sometimes this will allow them to, a development of meaning in life might allow them to build that resilience. Have you looked into that?
This is not specifically a part of the research that we do, but in general, certainly finding meaning in life, regardless of what that specific meaning or individual idiosyncratic meaning is very important. Whether it is focusing on school or work, or finding alternative outside experiences or engagements that involve hobbies, that involve engagement with social groups that one feels drawn to. I think all of these can be beneficial, and certainly are, in creating the environment where growth, and particularly post-traumatic growth, is supported. And I think one thing that has to be emphasized is building communities, right? So building communities that we as individuals can rely on, that allow us to not only share our experiences, but also be able to feel heard and seen in relation to what these other individuals have felt, and what their experiences may have been, and how we can share and learn from one another. So I think engagement in building of social interactions is very important, particularly coming out of COVID restrictions and isolation that we've all been exposed to. And this is something that relates to the work that we do with astronauts and with people who are in extreme environments, who are isolated and confined for longer periods of time. That actually the need for human interaction becomes very, very prominent as a way of maintaining mental health, and also maintaining a positive attitude.
When you have students during finals who are losing sleep, do you have advice you give? This is something I tend to struggle with.
Absolutely, and this is something that I tend to struggle with. I think everybody struggles with the same things when we're stressed, right? So I think being able to, again, I'm going back to these very simple things, but I think in terms of what each of us can do to improve our stress levels and our ability to manage stress, I think we need to fall back onto these very basic postulates, right? One, maintaining sleep hygiene. What does that mean? It means sleeping at least, and I know this may sound crazy to some people, sleeping at least 8 hours per night. Okay. Two, to be able better to do so, right? When we get ourselves into wherever we decide to sleep, put away your phones, your iPads, your electronic devices, and do not be exposed to the light that they produce, right? Create an environment which is dark, right? We're evolutionarily, we have been developing so that dark is something that promotes sleep. And the reason for that is when we expose ourselves to even a bit of light, that light, even if you close your eyes, if you're looking at your phone and you close your eyes, there's going to be light that will penetrate through your eyes and go into your brain, into the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which sits just behind your eyes. And that in fact is photoreactive, right? As soon as light hits it, it becomes more active, and problematically, it leads to production of cortisol. Cortisol is one of the major stress hormones in our bodies that increases our wakefulness and the state of arousal. And so if we're exposed to light, we effectively wake ourselves up or continue keeping ourselves up, regardless of the fact that we want to fall asleep. So first suggestion, be in a dark room. Second suggestion, bring the temperature down of the room. And three, try to keep it quiet, right? So those are very simple suggestions as to how to get yourself to sleep. Now, being able to maintain sleep may be more problematic, because we know that we are stressed because of cortisol, because of all of these other epinephrine, norepinephrine, other stress hormones we have a hard time maintaining sleep, right? And of course, this is an issue. So to make ourselves more likely to maintain good sleep quality and duration, one thing that we can do is we can physically exhaust ourselves. And we can do that through physical exercise, right? Physical activity, and particularly exercise. Why? Exercise, one, has multitude of positive physiological and psychological effects, right? From release of endorphins, beta endorphins that make us feel good, from cardiovascular immunological benefits and so on, right? Pretty much when we exercise, we improve pretty much every aspect of our physiology and cognitive and psychological functioning. Of course, I'm saying this within the context of reasonable, right? I'm not saying that you should run a marathon every day, far from it, right? But we should be sufficiently physically engaged where we, A, increase our cardiovascular output, and B, allow ourselves to be active to the point where we are capable of maintaining that activity for a period of 25 minutes or so that we can put in, and we can spare 25 minutes or half an hour a day to actually do that. And so this will help us maintain sleep. So these would be my first two, and the third one would be eat well. So maintain a good diet. So a lot of vegetables, a lot of antioxidants, and hydration. Right. So being able to put in as much water in your system as possible. So those would be my suggestions.
I know there are some people with sleep onset insomnia who have trouble falling asleep but can stay asleep. And this is often because it's hard to sit with thoughts if you happen to have an anxiety disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder. What would you say to these individuals?
So on top of the things that we have mentioned already, I would say that maybe it would be good for them to consult a sleep specialist or a sleep medicine specialist who would be able to suggest ways of improving or potentially increasing the likelihood of falling asleep by prescription of either natural supplements such as melatonin, right, or potentially other light supplements for that would increase the likelihood of falling asleep. Right? But apart from that, I would focus on staying away from medication, because for the most part it shouldn't be necessary, right? But in fact, focusing on the things that we can do in terms of lifestyle changes, and everybody can implement those.
Dr. Ivkovic, thank you so much for the wonderful information you've shared so far, and thank you, Maya, for asking great questions. I have a few more follow-up questions about the incredible work that you do, and would appreciate your input. Is part of the work that you do also looking into the possibility of humans living in other extreme environments, such as other planets?
The work we do is really trying to... So there's multiple studies we're working on, but most of them have to do with our ability to perform in these extreme environments, because they involve a lot of adaptation. Like, getting us, for example, from Earth to Mars, right? It's going to be at least 6 months of travel, and most likely that travel is not going to be in a big fancy ship. It's going to be in a capsule. It's going to be relatively small. And it's not going to be, we're not going to be exposed to gravity, right? So we're going to be in microgravity, just like we are on the International Space Station, for example, right? And so throughout that time, right, we have to do a lot of work to stave off the negative effects of microgravity or zero-G state on our bodies, right? Anything from sensory integration, motor integration, like how we perceive reality, right? What's up, what's down, everything gets thrown off. But on top of that, we have issues with cardiovascular health, right? Because our hearts start pumping less, and we evacuate a lot of fluids because the fluids get redistributed more evenly in our bodies, and so we operate with less fluids. And that means that when we get to, for example, a body with the gravity like Moon or Mars, there's going to be increased need for hydration, right? We're going to have to bring in more water, more electrolytes to be able to bring us back to the point where the heart would be able to pump normally without having to pump, the very dense blood that we will have, right? And so there's that. There is muscular deconditioning or atrophy, right? Because there is no continuous pressure that we exert our muscles to. There is, related to that, there is bone degradation, right? Loss of bone mass and bone density, which effectively leads to, or would lead to very quickly, without a lot of exercise, would lead to osteoporosis, right? And so there's a whole immune system goes off, right? And so there's a whole host of issues. But interestingly, right, the the two biggest challenges or risks that NASA has identified for Mars missions, so even for lunar missions, but particularly Mars missions, one, space radiation. How do we protect ourselves from space radiation outside of the Earth's magnetic field? And two, behavioral health. The fact that people are simply not really good at being isolated and being confined generally, and then also having to spend a lot of time with the same people for a long period of time under high levels of stress, right? So, it's always this idea, we like to say that it's probably not the aliens who are going to kill us, it's going to be ourselves who kill each other, right, on these missions. And this is something that has been recognized as I said, second highest operational risk for long duration human spaceflight, right? So we can, and so what we do is doing research in that realm.
That's amazing. There's just so many amazing things that you worked on, but I wonder, is there any specific ones that are your favorite, that are closest to your heart?
It's it's hard to pick, but it's also maybe not, because pretty much all of the research projects that we're working on have been very central to my not only research interests, but also motivation as to why I do research. So I would say there's two lines of research, two projects that I think stand out. One is the project that is funded by NASA, which is a part of what is called the Complement of Integrated Protocols for Human Exploration Research. The project that I lead within that complement, so this is the largest ever conducted biomedical study of humans in space, and my part, or our part, investigates the effects of long duration spaceflight on sleep, and how does sleep change when people fly to space for 6 months or a year or longer, and what does that do to our neurophysiology? So how does our brain work? How does it function? How does it change in its function? And how does our rest of our physiology work? So our heart, our muscles, and so on. But also, how does all of that affect our cognitive abilities and operational performance? So if we want to do some complicated tasks, such as docking two spacecraft in orbit or in transit to Mars, can we do that? And how does that skill change over the course of exposure to microgravity for, let's say, 6 months or a year? And are we able to, in fact, perform at a high level that is demanded of us when we reach our destination? So let's say we send people to Mars, and so after having spent about 6 months in transit in microgravity, will our astronauts be able to perform these tasks when they land on Mars? Because now they're going to be in a gravity condition, which is approximately 1/3 of that what we have on Earth, but still it's going to be much more than what they have been exposed to for the last 6 months. So there are a lot of questions that we really don't fully understand that sit at the basis of our ability to actually become interplanetary species, right? So when we talk about these trips to Moon and Mars and so on, and further on into space, we are really now beginning to explore the fundamentals of our ability to adapt to those situations, and what we need to do to make our performance better and optimize that performance ultimately in these situations. Because we can, without this understanding, without this knowledge, and creating countermeasures and creating procedures to help individuals who are there perform at their absolute best, without that, really there's no point of sending people to any of those locations. Because if we ultimately send couch potatoes who will not be able to move when they land to Mars, because their sensory system, their motor systems, their vestibular systems are going to be so affected negatively by having been exposed to microgravity for a long time, and then changes to 1/3 of the Earth gravity, then we really haven't done a good job, right? But this type of research that we are currently doing in understanding these neurophysiological changes that are associated with sleep patterns, with immune function in these conditions, as well as metabolomics, and ultimately behavior and operational performance, define the very essence of what these missions in the future are going to look like. And so this is one, and being the largest biomedical study that will go on probably for like 12 or 14 years altogether, that's to me as a kid who has always dreamt about going to space and doing something like this. This is an absolute dream come true, or just dream that I live every day. So that's one. The other one is something that is very personally very dear and close to my heart, and that's research on improving occupational health, particularly mental health of first responders, and in particular firefighters. And you can see the helmet here and the gear we have. Since I was a kid, probably as many kids, I was always fascinated by firefighting. I wanted to be a firefighter, and I was lucky to actually have gotten that wish come through when I was coming up. And so I was a firefighter for about 12 years in Croatia and then in the United States here, and have realized that as I was going through, and understanding more and more the limitations and challenges that firefighters face every day in their job, and particularly issues with sleep patterns, shift work, all of the stress that they face, traumatic experiences that they have, and so on. Right, I've realized that a lot of the work ultimately that we do for extreme environments such as spaceflight or military deployments, firefighters and first responders actually see every day. Right, and that shows, unfortunately, in very high rates of occupational medical issues, including cancers, including various types of immune disorders, cardiovascular issues, but also mental health disorders, particularly post-traumatic stress disorder. Right, and so when we think about the population that we all tend to rely on the worst days of our lives, unfortunately, right? This is where emergency services come into play. This is where they hopefully are there to save you and make that worst day of your life a bit better. We really need to think about how stressed and how challenging every day of that job for these individuals is, and what types of effect that those stressors leave as these firefighters, first responders go through their careers. So a line of research that we have established here is using the very same technology that we use for spaceflight in monitoring brain health and brain activity, as well as physiological activity. We can in fact use in our firefighting, in firefighters. And so we investigate currently, we have studies going on in collaboration with the Boston Fire Department and supported by the Last Call Foundation from Boston, where we use this technology for brain and physiologic monitoring to assess the levels of physiological and psychological stress as firefighters go through the realistic training activities that are part of their normal training protocols that are very, very realistic. So we have them climb ladders, 100-foot ladders, and perform various tasks on those ladders. We have them perform training in collapsed buildings, and we also have them perform search and rescue operations in burning buildings, right, where we actually put a building on fire, of course under semi-controlled conditions, and have them perform the same tasks that they would do on a regular fire, while all at the same time recording their brain activity, physiologic activity, and so on, to be able to assess how they respond to these very acute stressors of their job. And so our goal through this research is to, one, understand the stress responses and how they change over time of being on the job. Two, how we can improve our mitigation strategies to combat stress and to mitigate negative effects of stress. And three, how can we prevent the commonly occurring, and this is very important to keep in mind, mental health issues such as post-traumatic stress disorder in first responders and firefighters in particular, because we know that compared to the general population, where we have about 6 to 8% of population suffering from PTSD, in firefighting population that goes up to like 25% or even more. And so these are the aspects of my work that I really find very close to my heart, and to me they're the meaning and the motivation that I find in the job that I do every day.
Earlier you were speaking about sleep and how important it is, and I was wondering if you can explain a little bit about circadian misalignment, especially for those that are shift workers, especially night shift, or their shift changes, and how that can mess with their sleeping schedule and their body. If you can explain a little bit about that, I would really appreciate it.
I think sleep is tremendously important in dealing with stress and in maintaining health, right? And this is why sleep is the major physiological regulator, right? And we're learning this. The more we learn about sleep and its multitude of ways that it affects our physiological and mental health, we're becoming more and more aware of its central importance to our health and survival, right? So when we talk about shift workers in particular, right, we know from a number of studies that have looked into nurses, that have looked into firefighters, police officers, and so on, right, that and also astronauts for that matter, that circadian misalignment is a very big problem, right? So if you have a shift that starts at 7 a.m. goes on through 3, or depending on the job that you do, you can start at 7 p.m. and go on through the next morning. Of course, you will change that shift. Usually, you change those shifts every week or so, right? Or maybe you have a month on one shift and then you change to another. But there's going to be continuous change in the way that you're expected to sleep, and you're expected at the same time to perform at a very high level in a very high stressful job during times that would otherwise be times that you would be dedicating to sleep, right? And vice versa. So the importance of sleep cannot be overstated in those terms, because we know that with circadian misalignment, there is increase in professional errors that are made in so the interaction with other people, so social interactions go down, our ability to maintain focus severely diminished, right? Our psychomotor vigilance goes down, cognitive processing goes down, right? All of these things that you actually want to have at the highest possible level for the important jobs that you're doing, right? Being a nurse, being a firefighter, police officer, EMT, or paramedic, right? A physician, right? You need to be on top of your game, because somebody else's life will depend on your performance, right? And so, and that's why I think I stated that earlier, right? The ability to maintain sleep hygiene has a lot to do with the types of behavioral changes that we can implement ourselves, regardless of everything else, right? And that is to remove sources of light from our surroundings, keep ourselves as isolated auditorially, right? So from other sounds. So if you need to, plug in your ears with earplugs, fine, do that. And 3, being in an environment that feels protected, right? Because this is ultimately what we have evolved to like, what our preferences, right? To be able to relax enough so that we're protected, so we can actually sleep. And so I think that those are like the major things that we should focus on improving sleep. Of course, as I said, together with exercising and with healthy diet, right? And one thing that I'd like to kind of put as a line that connects all of these lines of areas of research together with spaceflight is the relatively recent, not so recent anymore, but in 2013, 2014, right, we've learned that sleep is actually associated with the activation of the then newly found system in our brains, which is the glymphatic system, right? So the glymphatic system, which activates, it's effectively like lymphatic system for the rest of our body, but this glymphatic system is activated by the glial cells that allows for the cleansing, literal cleansing and flushing of our brain from all of the metabolites and byproducts of metabolism that accumulates during the day. That system becomes active only about 6 to 7 hours of sleep. So without achieving 6 or 7 hours of sleep, a lot of the ameliorative action neurophysiologically that happens in our brains is not initiated. And why is that important? Unless we get enough sleep that allows for the glymphatic system to become active, we will not have the daily cleaning of the metabolic waste products that we've accumulated every day simply from the immense amount of activity that our brains do. And so what does that effectively do? If we don't achieve that, if we don't clear our brain, it means that gunk effectively, so proteins, fats, and so on, they will remain in our interstitial tissue in the brain, and that will mean that over time they will accumulate. We also know that it is exactly those types of accumulations, so amyloid, various forms of protein agglomerations that are associated with onset of dementias and other neurodegenerative disorders. So we have, for example, in the realm of neurodegenerative disorders, right, we have dementia from associated with Lewy body formation, right, dementia of Alzheimer's type, ultimately Parkinson's disease. All of them seem to be related in direct or indirect ways with accumulation of metabolic waste products over a course of our lifetimes that then cause progressive neurological damage that unfortunately we still do not know how to stop. And so putting sleep as the central part of our behavioral change that can lead to improved health and ultimately improved performance, not only in our jobs, but generally in life, I think cannot be overstated.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Yeah. I think many of us are trying to get enough sleep. And I think there are many things we can blame it on, but at the end of the day, like, it's our responsibility to kind of try to make it happen. But I was wondering, because you mentioned Antarctica, I was thinking regarding light, because when you have 6 months with sun not going down, does that affect the health of individuals? And then also, just to add on to that, some people use noise machines and things like that. So what about those things? Like when you cannot get rid of the light because of the sun, or when you need some kind of a noise, is that going to affect you?
Mm-hmm. So certainly. So I'll start with the sleep, and then we can go to Antarctica. Certainly, I think whatever works individually should be followed. One thing to keep in mind, though, is very often, and we have studies that show that, very often our brains are processing continuously the incoming sensory information, right? So although certainly, I mean, I can probably fall asleep and take a nap at any time, at any point, any place, I will still be processing a lot of the information that goes around me, and that will keep my brain active, right? But the point is to try to relieve the brain of constant activity that it's doing while it's monitoring its surroundings, while it's being environmentally aware and so on, right? To maintain this situational awareness, we want to shut that off as much as possible and want to allow the brain to, in fact, do what it is, quote unquote, supposed to do, right, while we sleep. And that is consolidation of memory, clearing of the metabolic waste, right, formation of new connections between various neurons or neuronal tract and so on, right? So the brain is really never, quote unquote, sleeping, but it is changing modes of operation relative to what is optimal for maintenance of overall health, right? As we just said a minute ago, right? So I think while we should always be open to idiosyncratic differences in how we sleep or like to fall asleep, right? Is it a white noise machine? Is it, playing a show in the background, or is it putting earplugs in your ears, right? So you don't hear anything, or is it just falling asleep and you're fine with whatever you do? It's okay, but we should, when we think about it, we should try at least to be honest with ourselves and use as much available technology as we have to, in fact, monitor our sleep patterns. Right now, I mean, today, most people have some sort of a smartwatch or smart device that allows them to at least monitor how they move overnight, right, during the night. And very often, these various gadgets have the ability to give some level of assessment of how well you slept, right, how much you moved and so on. And so looking at that data relative to what we are consciously aware of sometimes when we wake up in the middle of the night and maybe we realize, hey, I woke up because, I don't know, the 17th episode of the show that I put on that was playing when I was falling asleep came on, and hey, I've recognized somehow, this episode is really cool. We should try to be honest with ourselves and also question whether some of the techniques that do work for us to fall asleep are actually good at maintaining our sleep, because that's kind of where I'm tying back to what I started talking about, right? Our brains really never fully shut off, right? And there's some interesting studies we have done back in 2014 where we monitored our brain activity during 24-hour cycles, including sleep. And it was part of the recording was actually done by me on myself. And so I was wearing this device on me for 24 hours, and I was recording everything I was doing and making notes. And then, I went to sleep. And in the middle of the night, I was awoken. My best friend, we were sharing the apartment at that time. They had a baby, and so the baby started crying in the middle of the night. It's like 4:30 a.m., right? And I woke up and I said, okay, baby's crying. I made a note and everything was fine. But then, when I started looking at the data, I realized that the time when I woke up at 4:33 in the morning was about a half a minute after I had started seeing, a slew of physiological activity at the level of my prefrontal cortex, at the level of my heart, right? So my heart started pounding, my prefrontal cortex started receiving much more blood than it did until that point. It increased in oxygenation, and also I started moving my head, right, without knowing it, obviously, right? And I realized, this is a wonderful example of how our brains really never shut off. And then eventually, half a minute later, I woke up, right, and I was like, oh, the baby's crying. Well, my brain knew the baby was crying before I knew that what was happening, right? So when we talk about these instances of putting ourselves to sleep, we should also ask ourselves, are we helping ourselves keep sleeping, or to maintain that sleep for as long as we would want it, right? So maybe if there's a feature on whatever we're using to shut itself off after 15 minutes, that might be optimal. But otherwise, it's something that we should keep in mind as that we should just be honest with ourselves. If really our goal is to improve our sleep, the best way to fall asleep is to shut everything off, power through your thought process, and if we have difficulty with that, next day, let's put in some exercise. And after a good bout of exercise, it will be much, much easier to fall asleep. Right? And to go back to the first part of the question in terms of Antarctica, right? In fact, yeah, we have one of our collaborators who just completed his postdoc here, Stein Tholen. He's a physician who had spent a year in Antarctica as a research position in Concordia Station, which is run by European Space Agency. And so he has established a line of research where we will be using these devices, the NIRS devices for monitoring brain activity and physiology, to monitor changes in brain activity and physiology over the course of the full year in Antarctica, where there's going to be about 4 months of complete darkness, right? So imagine just living in absolute darkness, obviously, except for the artificial light, but everything else, if you go outside, it's going to be cold and it's going to be dark. So that definitely changes the physiology, right? So levels of melatonin, levels of serotonin, and a whole host of other parameters that affect not only behavior but also internal states, psychological, emotional states, affective states, and physiological performance. So we are investigating that, and we are trying to learn more about our adaptation to these very extreme environments where the isolation itself is very real. Because once you are delivered there, once you start your winter over, as it's called, there is no way for somebody to extricate you from there. With all the technology we may have, all of the best of will that somebody may have, if something happens, you're stuck there. There's no way to reach you, and that certainly is a very important consideration for just maintaining one's own mental health and levels of stress, which are certainly high.
Thank you for that. It was really wonderful hearing you explain that. And I mean, I could talk to you for hours about this because I'm really also interested about like consciousness and what is reality. Because you mentioned like your brain is always working, but it's not recognizing it. So it kind of creates that question of what is consciousness, what is reality. But I know you're short in time too, so I don't want to jump into that. I know you've done really great work for Parkinson's. If you can explain your work in that area, I think that will be fascinating for many as well.
During my master's degree research that I've done down in Johnson Space Center, what we were trying to do, astronauts have difficulty coming back to Earth from spaceflight because their vestibular system, so that part of the inner ear that allows us to maintain balance and control of our posture, is used to microgravity or to zero gravity. And so effectively, when they fly off to space, they have to adjust to microgravity and lose the notion of what's up and what's down. And when they come back to Earth, they have to readjust back to what they knew before. But now they come from space, literally, where they have been adjusted to zero gravity. So all of a sudden, they are having a really hard time understanding what the gravity pull does to them and how to adjust their posture and their balance in performance of daily activities. And so it is over the course of the first 48 hours after astronauts land back to Earth, they are readjusting their vestibular system to that new old normal of being in one gravity. While that is happening, they have a hard time maintaining balance. And so in order to improve that and to improve their safety, because falls are quite common in those situations, just like with the elderly patients or elderly individuals, we were trying to implement a countermeasure that would allow individuals to literally feel how they are leaning as they are standing or walking. And we're trying to do so with a small electrode patch that was placed on their tongue. And so if you think about it, it can be something like your mouse pad. If you think of what your mouse does on the screen as you move your mouse, right? Imagine that being the sensation you would feel in your tongue. So if you close your eyes and if you're just totally relaxed, right? If you lean forward, you would feel that this little pressure vibration would be moving forward on your tongue, right? And if you were moving backwards, you would feel it moving backwards. And so any orientation you would take, you would feel effectively that little cursor, if you wish, right, move on your tongue. And that would help you to maintain your balance, even when your vestibular system would be almost fully offline. And so that research was actually quite interesting. It yielded some really interesting results. But really, it was a precursor to the research that then I developed for my PhD, where we were again interested in using the same methodology, vibrotactile stimulation, but this time delivered through something that pretty much everybody these days has access to, and that is a smartphone, right? So we modulated the vibration controls on Android phones. At that time, there was Android phones. I did my PhD a few years ago. So that we could effectively turn our cell phones into metronomes. So you could wear your cell phone on the side of your body, like in contact with your skin, on your arm or somewhere where you could feel it, and it would be beating in tune or in rhythm of your steps. Right. So for Parkinson's patients, this is very important because one of the major hallmarks of Parkinson's disease is inability or lack or degrading ability to maintain regular patterns of automatic motion. Right. So, for example, anybody, a healthy individual can walk down the street and you're just pacing down the street, you're moving, but you're not really thinking about every step that you're making. Right? Because you just walk and you're thinking about 17 other things at the same time, right? And of course, that's not a problem. For Parkinson's patients, unfortunately, that is a big problem. Why? Because the area of our brain that is very directly involved in production of automatic motion, that is the substantia nigra in our striatum, is getting depleted. The neurons are dying off, right, because of this neurodegenerative process that is likely associated with accumulation of metabolic waste of these various proteins that get accumulated over time. And again, this is in relation to sleep or lack thereof, right? But so as this is happening, we have in Parkinson's patients, we have degrading ability to maintain these very basic types of motions, like walking or like voluntary motion. And there's a lot of freezing of gait in particular. And so we've known for some time that providing visual or auditory stimulation helps with that. This is why, for example, some of the best ways to maintain cognitive and motor fluidity for Parkinson patients is, for example, dancing tango, because that provides rhythm that they can follow and that can in fact use to generate motion. Of course, that becomes problematic if you're outside of a ballroom or if you're outside of spaces where you can actually perform such moves. So to bring this back to real life, we designed a technique where we could use something that is very inconspicuous, and that is literally vibration of the phone that taps you on your arm or some other part of the body where you can feel it, and that serves as the metronome for you to step in accordance to, right? So you feel vibration, you move your leg. You feel another vibration, you move your other leg, right? And we were able to show that by doing so, we can actually improve the gait cycles of people with Parkinson's disease that become more fluid. There is less freezing. And in fact, it frees up some of their prefrontal cortical function because they don't have to think about making every move every second as they're moving, right? And so there's multiple levels in which this type of sensory augmentation helps these individuals to maintain not only better balance, but also better gait and make them more functional for a longer period of time. And so that then has been the work on Parkinson's disease. But from that, right, so it was like spaceflight related vibrotactile stimulation that moved into the clinical population of Parkinson's patients. And now we're moving it back into spaceflight, where we are now developing techniques for vibrotactile stimulation that can be used to improve the orientation and the situational awareness of astronauts who will be landing on the moon. Why is that important? Well, just like individuals who have been exposed to microgravity when they fly to the space station, our astronauts who will be landing on moon will have spent several days in orbit, and so or in transit to the moon and in microgravity conditions. So their vestibular system again is going to be offline. So once they land, they will need to have a bit of a time to readjust, but unfortunately, that time is not going to be enough for them to do all the things they need to do. So we need to, from the moment, literally, before they start landing, and certainly the moment when they land on the moon and later Mars, we need to be able to improve their gait, their postural control, to the point where they can perform all the tasks they need to perform. And to do so, one of the ways that we're exploring is vibrotactile stimulation that will allow them then to intuitively understand how they are moving through space, because they will not be able to rely fully on their vestibular system because it's going to be deconditioned, at least to a degree. And so if they can start relying on sensory augmentation such as vibrotactile stimulation, that's like light touches on your body, that would be a tremendous help, right? So this is kind of the line of research that is going from space to the clinic and back to space, and then eventually it will come back to the clinic at some point.
Could that type of vibrotactile technology eventually be used to help my grandma from landing on the floor or other elderly patients?
Absolutely, and so this is exactly this translational work translational paradigm that we're working with them, where everything we do in these extreme environments allows us to in fact improve the care and prevention eventually for people on the ground, right? Be it normative populations such as elderly people, but also patients who suffer from various neurodegenerative or motor disorders, right? But we know that, for example, the single highest risk for elderly population in terms of survival is falls, right? Yeah. About 75 to 80% of elderly population falls, and that leads to clinical degradation that ultimately then leads to death, right? So these are massive numbers, and so there's a number of technologies that we are thinking about and methods in which we improve the gait and the balance and the sensory motor integration in extreme environments of spaceflight, but then bring it back to Earth so that your grandma, other grandmas out there, and grandpas could actually maintain balance better and prevent falls. And in fact, some of the technologies that have been developed along this way from our collaborators, such as Katie Forth from Houston, they've developed a spin-off technology that is called Zibrio, which is effectively a scale that people can stand on, and on top of just measuring your weight, it also measures your balance, and it gives you a score that tells you how balanced you are today, right? Should you be more careful? Are you okay or not? And so there are many technologies and many ways that this research from literally outside of the world is brought back to this planet to help people live better and healthier lives.
That's wonderful. And I think you were going to show us something that you worked on, correct? Some cool devices for us.
Yeah. And so one of the ways that we can, in fact, objectively monitor what is happening in the brain, what is happening in human body, as we perform these various activities, are the devices that we have been developing here in our lab for years now. So primarily, this was a system that was originally conceived of by doctors Gary Strangman and Tran Zhong, who were still the senior researchers in the group, and they're called NINSCAN. It stands for Near Infrared Neuromonitoring. Over time, these systems have developed from being very, very simple to being very complex, so that right now we have them ready, and we're for spaceflight, and we're actually working on bringing them into spaceflight, where we'll be doing some very, very groundbreaking work on brain imaging in space. Current versions of NINSCAN, and I'm going to demonstrate it very quickly. So here's the headpiece. What we have in here is a set of our sensors. These are sources of light up here, and these are detectors. And so the sources of light shine near-infrared light, which is very, very, very low-energy laser light that penetrates through the skull or any other tissue, and then eventually gets refracted out of the tissues that lay underneath the surface. In this case, when I put this on my head, I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to mess up my hair. So if I put this on my head right now, if I turn it on, what would happen? The light would shine straight into my prefrontal cortex, and it would get refracted off of my cortical tissue. The light that gets refracted will be picked up by those sensors that I've shown you, and we'll be able to calculate based on the changes in wavelength. So we know the wavelength of light going into the tissue, and then we will know the wavelength of light that is being picked up. So whatever the difference is between the two wavelengths, we know that those wavelengths were absorbed. And based on that absorption spectrum, we will be able to say what is the concentration of molecules or the components that absorb that light. Particularly, we are shining light into the tissue that incorporates the wavelengths that are absorbed by oxygen and by hemoglobin, right? We also have other ability to monitor other components such as cerebrospinal fluid, water, fat, and so on. And that allows us to actually create heat maps, if you wish, of brain activity, because when you think about it, just like in a functional magnetic resonance imaging image, right? What we're looking for is brain activation based on flow of blood, right? So there's this blood oxygen level dependent signal is what we are measuring. And so when you think about brain tissue, whenever it's active, it requires more blood that brings oxygen, right? And when some parts of the brain are not active, there's not going to be that much blood. The level of oxygen is going to be lower. So effectively, if I turn the device on now, I would be able to say how much blood and how much oxygen and how much what is the distribution between oxygenated and deoxygenated blood in the prefrontal cortex of my brain, and therefore I'll be able to say which parts of my brain here are active. Of course, this is, you can see, a portable device. It's very light. On top of that, we have electrodes that we can place pretty much on any part of our body, to monitor activity of our eyes, electrical activity of our brain, electrical activity of our, for example, facial muscles or other muscles for that matter, activity of our heart. We can also monitor respiration. We can also monitor blood pressure, which is a totally new technology, which is unique, very unique in overall. So we can monitor blood pressure continuously, right? I think you as a nurse will appreciate that. So you can have continuous blood pressure monitoring, and it is cuffless, right? We don't need to use the manual sphygmomanometer. We can actually just use the integrated sensors that we have to allow monitoring for that continuously for 24 hours or longer. All of the data we collect here can be collected continuously for 24 hours or longer. So we have ability to monitor activities for a very long time. And of course, this is the actual device. As you can see, it's this particular device is a little bulky for our standard. And the reason why it's bulky is it has been designed for spaceflight. So it is encased in an aluminum casing that prevents fire hazard. So one of the big issues in spaceflight is prevention of fire hazards. So we don't want to have fires in space. So this helps us maintain that risk to absolute minimum. Also, it protects the internal electronics from spaceflight radiation, right? This device is really, really small, as you can see. It can literally fit into a pocket. And other devices that we use for terrestrial applications are much lighter, right? All of the data is collected on an SD card, which is over here. So it's a very simple data collection. It runs on a single battery that is rechargeable. And so effectively, what you have here is a brain imager and physiologic monitoring device that can be deployed pretty much anywhere. And is very easy to deploy. We have done studies where individuals with only about 15, 20 minutes of training have deployed it successfully to collect data for over a month. So this is something that that we use currently in all of our studies, and the technology is the basis for pretty much all of our research projects as we move into bringing this technology not only to the clinical realm, but also to austere medical practices, right? So imagine bringing this into areas of natural disasters, human-made disasters, refugees, refugee clinics, for example, or also any environment where we do not have standard clinical equipment for monitoring of vital signs and potentially diagnostics, right? So there's a lot of potential, we think, for these devices. So this type of devices we are now not only using in extreme environments such as spaceflight or simulated spaceflight, but also, and we are more and more using them in extreme environments on the ground. So with our firefighter research, and our goal is to bring them into the clinical realm, similar to what I'm currently doing with the Boston Veterans Administration healthcare system, where we use these devices to objectively monitor brain and physiologic activity during PTSD therapy sessions. And ultimately, the goal is to expand the use of these devices to other specialties in medicine and psychiatry. But one of our really deep desires is to make these devices usable and deployable in austere settings to help people at the greatest level of need. So we're thinking about field hospitals, we're thinking about austere environments such as refugee camps, we're thinking about conflict zones where there's a great need for medical devices, but a great austerity in terms of available power, general available resources, and the use of standard equipment is really contraindicated. So we're hoping that ultimately we'll be able to bring these technologies from space to Earth and then back to space for some future exploration. So that's the goal.
Is the pictures that you have, is this what you're wearing, the ones that we're sharing? I think that's a different one. It's like a black.
Yeah, this is a previous. So the one that I've shared is from 2014. So it was a previous version of the device, which was much less complex.
Oh, that's awesome! Thank you for sharing those.
Yeah. Of course.
Maya, do you have any?
So, and it applies to multiple topics you've covered. In terms of having a background noise when you fall asleep, I know that music often will activate the limbic system rather than the prefrontal cortex because it tends to bring emotional reactions out of people. And you mentioned when the baby started crying, your prefrontal cortex got very active. Would music be maybe a superior kind of distractor for enabling sleep if you can't fall asleep when you're too lost in thought?
Mm-hmm. So in fact, we currently have a study effectively called PPOP, and that study is geared towards understanding relative contributions and providing comparisons between the effects of different types of sensory stimulation, such as music, such as visual stimulation, auditory stimulation, general auditory stimulation, tactile stimulation, on improving a level of physiological stress or reducing levels of physiological stress or in terms of autonomic response, right? And so generally, I would say music certainly, and not all types of music, obviously, but can have very positive effects in terms of reducing your level of autonomic output, so calming you down. But I think, again, this is going to be very idiosyncratic. And I don't think that there is a clear-cut answer to that question. Not at least not yet. But there are studies that are being done in that realm that will be able to tell us more. But certainly, I wouldn't be comfortable saying you should play certain type of music if you want to fall asleep. I think it's going to be massively different for different people.
And then for Parkinson's, I was thinking if there's not enough space to practice doing tango, could the music and the rhythm of the music allow for some improvement?
I absolutely think so. Yeah, I think that's something that has been coming up in research, whereas this rhythmic feature of certain types of music in particular, that seems to be has ameliorative effect on motor flow and motor performance, particularly if there is some mental imagery that is involved, right? If you can imagine yourself following a rhythm, like walking in tune with something, or just doing some manual work or whatever, right, in tune with these rhythmic sounds, then that is generally ameliorative because it allows you to ultimately create motor programs, right, and not necessarily enact them, but even when you get to the point of enact them, it will become easier because you have trained them effectively in your mind. Right?
Thank you. Many of the students I'm studying with, in addition to myself, we're all curious about how to get more research experience. Do you have any tips for us, or places where we can go to look for this experience?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a very, very good question and a very important part of the educational process in general, particularly at the level where a lot of Harvard Extension students are. I think being able to identify the areas of first research, but generally activity that one wants to be involved in over the course of their career is important. And that I'm saying that with a caveat of the fact that I think we're all exploring things all the time, and how we move through what we think are the things that we want to do may change over time, but that's fine. I think we all live in a particular moment, and we should pursue things or motivations that we have in order to find practical experiences in terms of internships, in terms of exposure to research environment. I think it is good to talk to your instructors Depending on what various people do, they may or may not have ability to take on research interns. But in any case, they will be able to share the information they have about some other people they may know, right? So your instructors don't live in a vacuum, right? They will know other people. They will know other individuals who may be working in a similar field who are bringing in research interns and potentially have even paid internship possibilities, right? Which are very far and few apart these days, unfortunately, but that's how things are. So I would say certainly get involved with your instructors and ask them questions about the type of research they do, whether or not they have space in their lab to bring in students and to engage in mentoring, right? And of course, I think that's the first step. Second step certainly is to cast a wide net, expose yourself to experiences in different fields and in different labs, if you have time for that, because I think that brings a lot of breadth and important insight into how things are done. Because if you spend all of your time doing work in one lab or in one environment, you will learn things certainly about how that lab does certain things. But I think it's very important to also have an open mind and say, okay, well, these people do it this way. Maybe I can find out something else. I can learn more about somebody else. And being able to, especially in institutions such as, for example, Mass General Hospital, right, Harvard, that have so many labs that are here in close proximity to one another. I think it's a great and very often underutilized resource for students that the students don't necessarily use to expand their understanding, their knowledge, their skill set of that is relevant to what they want to do in the future, right? With their careers. And so if you start an internship in one lab, don't spend all the time in that one lab unless that's it for you, right? You find yourself in a situation that all of your potential dreams and ideas of what you want to do in life are answered, which is quite unlikely, but okay. I think it's important to explore, and I think it's important to engage in different types of activities for maybe shorter periods of time than you might want to do them, but expose yourself to as many experiences as possible. And I think that would be ultimately very beneficial to you in the long run, particularly as you're moving into the next steps of your careers after this degree, right? Because you will have the opportunity to be exposed to different environments and also learn different skills, right? Many of the areas of work in psychology and neuroscience involve a lot of technical expertise, right? So being able to learn that expertise and being able to do it practically in a lab, I think is really invaluable. I mean, that is the core benefit of being able to actually get into a lab and do some work, right? And I think for the most part, all the instructors, or most of the instructors that teach, that have that capability, are open to inviting students to be a part of their lab. And of course, one thing, and that comes from perspective of a lab director and from a PI, is that I think being serious about what you want to do is very important, because there's always, from our perspective, from the perspective of like lab directors, there's always interest, right? But if I am going to spend time in investing time in mentoring someone, that is time that I'm not going to be able to invest in something else. And I don't have enough time as it is, right? So I think from perspective of researchers, I think it goes a long way if the applicants and the candidates are, one, serious about what they want to do, and also want to keep to the promise of whatever project we agree on doing together, right? And I think that kind of agreement, if you wish, is very important to establish early on and stick to, right? Because really, while everybody on the one hand is invested in bringing young people up, in providing opportunities, I also think that this feeling and intention can be soured if you spend quite a bit of time mentoring people, and then they only provide a certain percentage of their motivation or a certain percentage of their work because they're busy doing other things. If that's the case, that's fine. Go do other things, but don't focus on this work just partially. So I think that's trying to provide a very realistic perspective from both ends. I hope that helps.
Yeah. So for people who may be interested in studying both extreme environments and, I guess, extreme internal environments such as stress, do you have any resources you could share where they might begin to look for those types of maybe volunteer positions?
Sure. They can start by we will share our website, so you can go to our website. You can see the resources. You can see what we do. There's a section on that website that allows you to send an email. It'll be received by the lab, and depending on your interests, this can be the first step on bringing you on board to the lab to be an intern. Unfortunately, at this point, we only can offer unpaid internships because we don't have money to pay extra salaries for non-professional staff. But we certainly are open to providing as much support and mentoring as we possibly can, and investing time in teaching motivated individuals who are interested in the field to be exposed to some of the cutting-edge research that we do here.
Because we have a large global community, and I know that there are a lot of students specifically that have asked us to kind of ask for opportunities for students that cannot be physically available but can be available online. Do the volunteer opportunities extend to these students, or they have to be physically in the lab?
So it depends. There are certainly opportunities that can be done remotely, like, for example, helping us with generating online tools for assessment of like psychometric assessments or surveys or the various aspects of our work that can be pretty much done from anywhere. Also, building or maintaining content on our website. Right, that's a part of the work that we have to do, and certainly if we can delegate some of that work to somebody else, that would be great, honestly. And so we have only one permanently employed clinical research assistant who's doing a tremendous job in managing all these studies. But with the group being relatively small and with limited administrative help resources, we really are stretched to do kind of all of the work that one needs to do, both science and administration. So I think if we can, one of the things that we would certainly be able to offer is doing some of this remote work that can be done, that can support our research portfolio. That does include remotely accessed and remotely administered surveys or research techniques that we use for our various projects. So yeah, it's certainly, in short, it's people do not necessarily have to be here in the lab to gain experience, but obviously the experiences that can be gained remotely are limited because we do focus on laboratory work, and we do focus on laboratory techniques, certainly. So in that sense, yeah, it would be beneficial to be here, but certainly if there are motivated individuals who want to be exposed to this work remotely, we can make that work too.
Your research is it definitely involves a lot of out-of-the-box thinking and beginning to consider things that we wouldn't know to consider necessarily. How do you challenge yourself to even begin that process and participate in all of this amazing work?
I think when we start exploring extreme environments, whether they're internal or external, right? Because one of the things that I think should be emphasized, and often is not, and I think that causes a lot of struggle generally, and ultimately can be emotionally damaging, is that our perception of stress is individual, right? And so what is stressful to me may not be stressful to you, may not be stressful to any of our listeners or viewers, but it doesn't reduce the effect that perceived stress has on us, right? And ultimately, all stress effectively originates in our brain and the rest of our bodies, right? And so when we think about extreme environments in particular and how they stress us out and what we can learn from them in terms of our stress response and ability to manage stress, I think we should keep in mind that we can, to a certain extent at least, train ourselves and make ourselves less susceptible to some of the stressors that we will undoubtedly confront. And a lot of those stressors have to do with our physical well-being. And again, here I will emphasize the importance of sleeping right, eating right, and exercising well. But also internal states which originate from our evaluation of the reality of the surroundings that we exist in, right? Of the various types of forms of stressors, of the various forms of obligations that we feel we have, and so on. Right? And I think, to a degree, relativizing them through focus on the things that we can do, right? While we are continuously pressured to perform at the highest level all the time, to resolve all the issues or all the things that are put in front of us or put on our plate, I think we should prioritize. We should prioritize, one, ourselves in terms of maintaining physical and mental health. And again, I will emphasize sleep, exercise, healthy diet, right? And then engaging with people in our lives and expanding our networks so that we are effectively not isolated from the world we live in. And I think that in the long run, and many, many studies show that, right, that maintenance of positive affect and ultimately mental and physical health are highly correlated with living in or surrounded by groups of people that form communities. So communities that are invested in maintaining the well-being of its members, and that relates, or that starts with our relationship with our loved ones, with our peers, with people who we may not know but may engage with, and maintaining those relationships, I think, is very important. And it is very hard in these days, particularly, and as we are now, we are recording this via Zoom, and as great as it may be that it brings us together, Kimia, who's in California, we who are sitting in Boston, right? It's great that we're able to do so, but also we tend to use these means of remote communication even when we don't necessarily need to, because they're convenient. And I think it's very important for us to keep in mind that I think it would be very beneficial for us, or it is very beneficial for us, to maintain social contact with people, right? And so social contact where we build communities, where we collaborate with people, where we engage with people, to exchange ideas, because I think one of the big issues that we're facing globally in terms of our social and cultural interactions is isolationism, right? That we tend to isolate ourselves from others, from other viewpoints, and it becomes very easy to become dogmatic, right? And I think that's one of the issues that we as individuals and as societies have to tackle, is to be open to novel ideas, novel ways of looking at things, but also engaging with people and understanding other people's points of views, and certainly finding common ground in, I want to say, science, right? Because if there is a method, if there's a way of finding common ground that is as objective as we as fallible humans can achieve, that is through the scientific method. And so this is what I would focus.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. And I really appreciate the time that you spend with us. It was wonderful, and I can't wait till we share it. And thank you again, Maya, for making this happen.
Thank you so much. That's definitely our intention at the Harvard Extension School Psychology Student Society. So, and thank you so much again for joining us today.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.